It's there, but that's it.
Right. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. It's really wonderful to see all the friendly faces of those who are regulars and those who come here now and then, and particularly people who are new to our congregation, so you are most welcome. As you know from the front of our order of service, this is a welcoming place where one where we hope that everyone can feel that this is a spiritual home, where you know that you are treasured, and a place where you can make a difference. If you look at the front of the order of service, you will see our mission statement. We are a welcoming congregation, freely seeking intellectual and spiritual growth. We strive to create a larger community of peace, justice, and love. After today's service, we wish that everyone would join us for hospitality and good conversation in our hospitality room or on the patio. People really enjoy each other here, and you are most welcome to join in. The blue insert fills you in on all of the activities that are going on in our congregation, and it seems to become more and more filled in every week. My congratulations to the level of activity that we're achieving. Should you need a larger print hymnal or a hearing device, one of the ushers will be pleased to provide them to you. Just raise your hand or trip them in the aisle or do something. And finally, as is our custom, we request that you turn off your cell phone. Just think for a moment that it may be in your purse or in your pocket. It'd be good to turn it off. Or any other electronic device that could disturb your neighbors or the service. And now, it is time to enter into a reverent place. Our sanctuary here is a real beauty. It's simple, it's spare. We have no need of stained glass because we have nature flowing in through these great windows. So let us quiet our souls and listen to the prelude.
Into this home we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring our compassionate hearts and our will towards justice. Into this home we bring our courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Let's join together in the chalice lighting response printed in your order of service as Barbara lights our chalice. Is she here? In the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, we gather this day. May the flame we now kindle be to us a symbol of the unity we seek. And let's rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 188, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Oh, it's probably not 188, is it? It's the number. Enter, rejoice, and come in. 361.
Good morning. I'm Heather, and I'm the Director of Religious Exploration. And I have a story to tell you today, but first I need some volunteers. I need probably 8 or 10 adult volunteers to come stand up here and be birds. I have birds for you. Anyone who is willing to come up and help me with my story today? Just stand right up. If you stand right up there and just put that on. Right up here, right up here. Yeah, put it on. Come on up, put it right on. Yep. You can stand right up here. Okay, here's one for you. Go ahead and take one. All right, how about you have a second one? You get a second one. Okay, you're going to get a second one. And this is a puppet. You can put it right on your hand. Oh, good, you got one. There. And those are puppets, so you can put them right on your hands. Okay, so the story I have today is called The King of the Birds. And it's about leadership. And right now in our congregation, we're getting ready to choose new leaders. Bill McCormick is saying yes. We're going to have whole new leaders. And so we're talking about what makes a good leader. In our country, we're getting ready to choose a new president. And we're talking a lot about what makes a good leader there. So this story today is about leadership, about the birds. So once long, long ago, the eagle gathered all the birds together and said, "We know that the lion is the king of the beasts, but he should not rule us. We fly in the air. We should choose our own king." And all the birds were chattering. Can you chatter for me? Saying, yes, yes. So they started talking about what makes a good leader. And the eagle, of course, said, "I should be the leader because I am the most majestic of all the birds." And so the birds talked about that for a little bit. And then the owl, although I don't have an owl, so let's see, this is going to be the owl. The owl said, "I am the wisest of all the birds. I should be the king or queen of the birds." And the birds chattered and chattered about that, what they thought about that. And then the buzzard, let's see, this is a buzzard. This is the buzzard. The buzzard said, "I'm the strongest of all the birds. I should be the queen of all the birds." And so they all were chattering and talking, and finally they got ready, and they decided they were going to take a vote. They'd all decided who they thought should be the king or the queen of the birds. And then there was a new little voice, and the hummingbird came and said, "But my wings go faster than everyone else's. I should be the queen of the birds." And all the birds looked at that little tiny hummingbird, and they thought, "I don't know about that." And so they started arguing. Can you argue for me? And those birds said, "Well, that little hummingbird does have some courage to stand up to all those big birds." The eagle said, "I have an idea. We will have a contest. We will see who can fly the highest, and that will be the king or the queen of the birds." And the birds thought that was a good idea, except for little hummingbird, who said, "There's no way I can fly the highest. I can maybe fly the fastest. My wings go really quickly." And so that hummingbird went off and decided that that was not a fair or just way to decide the leader of the birds. And so she came up with a little plan. So the next morning at sunrise, all the birds gathered for this contest. And Hummingbird had a plan. She went, and Eagle was so busy getting ready, didn't even notice that she burrowed herself right into his feathers. And she stuck herself right inside there where he was, and he didn't even notice. And so they got ready. And so the owl and the eagle and the buzzard and a few other birds started flying as high as they could. And one by one, the little birds dropped down because they couldn't go. The owl couldn't do it. It was a little too hard. The buzzard dropped out. And the eagle was the only one left, soaring high. And that eagle, he went up a little bit higher, and then he said, "I'm the king of the birds." And then Hummingbird came out and went a little higher and said, "I am the queen of the birds." And a lot of the birds weren't really happy about that because that was some trickery. But some of the birds said, "Well, hey, that was pretty creative. We need a leader who's creative." And so they started arguing. Do we need a strong leader? Do we need a creative leader? Do we need a wise leader? Do we need a leader that has courage like that hummingbird? And the birds are still arguing over who should be the leader of all the birds. So I want all of you to think about that. What are the qualities that we need here in our congregation for our leaders? What are the qualities that we need in any leader we have, especially in the president of our country? So that's a conversation for us to think about as we talk in our classes this month about the Blue Promise, which is believe in our ideas and act on them, or to all of the adults, the democratic process. So that's one of the things that we're talking about this month and today. So thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to put them right on here.
Let's remain seated and sing our children out with hymn number 389, Gathered Here. We'll sing it through twice. It's good to see everyone here this morning. This is our time to share with one another our joys and our sorrows, those things that we way shared by this congregation.
We also got an audio tech with the bargain. There are many forms of meditation, from our own cultures, from history, from distant lands. I'd like to share with you one of my own practices, is to find a poem that speaks to me, is accessible, and perhaps having many layers underneath it. It need not be long. Some scholars say that poetry is like instant coffee. It needs the hot water of our thinking in order to deliver its flavors. I try to dive in and seek its meaning, and often my own meaning. So what I'm going to do today is to read a fragment from a poem by Langston Hughes called "Let America Be." He was a very important figure in the Harlem Renaissance, and it talks about what America must become and what it is today, and by implication, it asks us to take part in that growth. So I suggest to you that you might want to close your eyes, relax, and listen carefully to the words. Perhaps you can continue the meditation in the musical response. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be. The land where every man is free. The land that's mine, the poor man's, the Indians, the Negroes, and me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath. America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain. All the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. Thank you so much. In September of 1960, the Nixon-Kennedy contest for the presidency was in full cry. And one of the issues was Kennedy's religion, he being an Irish Catholic. Were it not for this year's campaign, we would forget how religion was an enduring challenge. Kennedy chose to face the issue squarely by being invited to speak to a powerful group of Protestant ministers assembled in Houston. I ask your forgiveness because at the time there was a use of gender, as in all men are created equal, and so it's not an intentional insult. Please forgive it. The title that he chose was "The Kind of America in Which I Believe." While the so-called religious issue is necessarily and properly the chief topic here tonight, I want to emphasize from the outset that we have far more critical matters to face in the 1960 election. The spread of communist influence. Until now, it festers 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The humiliating treatment of our president and vice president who no longer respect our power. The hungry children I saw in West Virginia. The old people who cannot pay their doctor's bills. The families forced to give up their farms. An America with too many slums, too few schools, and too late to the moon and outer space. These are the real issues which should decide this campaign, and they are not religious issues. For war and hunger and ignorance and despair know no religious barriers. But because I am a Catholic and no Catholic has ever been elected president, the real issues in this campaign have been obscured, perhaps deliberately, in some quarters less responsible than this one. So it is apparently necessary for me to state once again, not what kind of church I believe in, for that should be important only to me, but what kind of America I believe in. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote. Where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, from the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will directly or indirectly upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where no religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is treated as an act against all. For while this year it may be a Catholic against whom the finger of suspicion is pointed, in other years it has been and may someday be again a Jew or a Quaker or a Unitarian or a Baptist. In fact, it was Virginia's harassment of Baptist preachers, for example, that helped lead Jefferson to the Statute of Religious Freedom. Today, I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you, until the whole fabric of our harmonious society is ripped at a time of great national peril. Finally, I believe in an America where religious intolerance will someday end, where all men and all churches are treated as equal, where every man has the same right to attend or not attend the church of his choice, where there is no Catholic vote, no anti-Catholic vote, no block voting of any kind, and where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews at both lay and pastoral level will refrain from those attitudes of disdain and division which have so often marked their works in the past, and promote instead the American ideal of brotherhood. This is the kind of America in which I believe, and it represents the kind of presidency in which I believe. A great office that must neither be humbled by or making it the instrument of any one religious group, nor tarnished by arbitrarily withholding its occupancy from the members of any one religious group. I believe in a president whose religious views are his own private affair, neither imposed by him upon the nation or imposed by the nation upon him as a condition to holding that office. I would not look with favor upon the president working to subvert the First Amendment's guarantees of religious liberty, nor would our system of checks and balances permit him to do so. And neither do I look with favor upon those who would work to subvert Article 6 of the Constitution by requiring a religious test, even by indirection. If they disagree with that safeguard, they should be out openly working to repeal it. I want a chief executive whose public acts are responsible to all groups and obligated to none, who can attend any ceremony, service, or dinner his office may appropriately require of him, and whose fulfillment of his presidential oath is not limited or conditioned by any religious oath, ritual, or obligation. This is the kind of America I believe in, and this is the kind I've fought for in the South Pacific, and the kind my brother died for in Europe. No one suggested then that we may have a divided loyalty, or we did not believe in liberty, or that we belonged to a disloyal group that threatened the freedoms for which our forefathers died. And in fact, this is the kind of America for which our forefathers died. When they fled here to escape religious test oaths that denied office to members of less favored churches, when they fought for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, and when they fought at a shrine I visited today, the Alamo, for side by side with Bowie and Crockett died McCafferty, Bailey, and Carey. No one knows whether they were Catholic or not, for there was no religious test at the Alamo. I ask you to follow in that tradition, to judge me on the basis of 14 years in Congress, on my declared stands against ambassador to the Vatican, against unconstitutional aid to parochial schools, and against any boycott of the public schools which I attended myself. And instead of doing this, do not judge me on the basis of pamphlets and publications. I do not consider these quotations binding upon any of my public acts. Why should you? But let me say with respect to other countries, I am wholly opposed to the state being used by any religious group, Catholic or Protestant, to compel, prohibit, or prosecute the free exercise of any religion. I hope that you and I condemn with special fervor those nations who deny their presidency to Protestants and those who deny it to Catholics. But let me stress again that these are my views. For contrary to common newspaper usage, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with these views, in accordance with which my conscience tells me to be in the national interest, and without regard to outside pressure or dictates. If this election is decided on the basis that 40 million Americans lost their chance of being president on the day they were baptized, then it is the whole nation that will be the loser. In the eyes of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world, in the eyes of history, and in the eyes of our own people. But if, on the other hand, I should win this election, then I will devote every effort of mind and spirit to fulfilling the oath of the presidency. I might add, with the oath I have taken for 14 years in the Congress. For without reservation, I can solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, so help me God.
The morning's offering for the ongoing mission of this congregation and its good works will be gratefully received. In 1940, a set of papers from some of the framers of our Constitution came into the possession of the Library of Congress, most prominently those of James Madison. It took a while for the American history librarians Dorothy Eaton and Elizabeth Fleet to go through and catalog the papers. But in 1946, Fleet published in the William and Mary Quarterly an undated document from James Madison that has come to be known as the Detached Memoranda. Madison had penned this document sometime after he left the presidency in 1817, And in it, he admonished any state that had yet to fully eliminate laws that had supported an established church or that treated religious minorities unfairly. He held up the act for establishing religious freedom of his own state of Virginia as a true standard of religious liberty. Its principle, he wrote, the great barrier against usurpations of the rights of conscience. The bill was originally drafted and proposed by Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson actually had it listed on his gravestone as one of his greatest achievements, alongside the Declaration of Independence. In the preamble of the act, Jefferson wrote that our civil rights are no more dependent on our religious opinions than they are our opinions about physics or geometry. But the heart of the act, its true operating language, stated that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinion or belief. But that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no way diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities. While Jefferson wrote the bill, it was Madison who pushed through its passage during the time that Jefferson was serving as ambassador to France. In vivid language, Madison suggested in his later memoranda that any state provisions that fell short of this standard will be found to leave crevices, at least through which bigotry may introduce persecution. A monster, he said, that feeding and thriving on its own venom gradually swells to a size and strength overwhelming all laws, divine and human. There's no doubt about Madison's opinion. But this was a fear that had been shared by many of the framers of the United States Constitution, including Jefferson, of course, but Benjamin Franklin, George Mason, George Washington, and others. And despite Madison's rich rhetoric, the point wasn't that religion itself was bad, but that religion combined with the raw power of government will undoubtedly lead to tyranny. Madison raised the example of the church in Rome at the time of the Reformation and much closer to his own experience. The abuses of the Anglican Church both back home in England and as the state church in Virginia, where dissenting preachers, those Baptists that John mentioned, would invariably be tossed into jail for disturbing the peace. It was, of course, Madison and Jefferson who were the prime architects of the Constitution. While he was in France, Jefferson had sent Madison crates of books and papers on political theory and practice, and Madison had devoured them all. Enlightenment thinkers who stressed the use of reason over the dogmatic tenets of established religion were prominent on both their reading lists, and especially the work of John Locke, whose letters concerning toleration provided three strong arguments for promoting the right of conscience. Locke's first point was that human beings, whether acting individually or as agents of a state, could not dependably evaluate or judge truth claims of competing religious standpoints. He then stated that even if we were capable of such evaluation, enforcing a true single religion would not have the desired effect because belief cannot be compelled by violence. Finally, he argued that coercing religious uniformity would lead to more social disorder than in allowing diversity. Locke had been influenced in part by the passionate arguments for religious tolerance of English Baptists, John Smith and Thomas Helwys, as well as American Baptist Roger Williams, whose 1644 tract, The Bloody Tenet of Persecution for Cause of Conscience, had been distributed widely in England. Williams, if you will recall, had been expelled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony by our Puritan forebears and founded the Providence Plantation in the 1630s, which became the first organized state in modern history that provided religious liberty and the separation of church and state. As Madison and Jefferson approached the Constitutional Convention in 1789, fresh from their efforts to disestablish the church in Virginia, the situation in the rest of America was still muddied by the fact that most of the colonies had their own brand of state-sponsored religion. Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire all imposed taxes to pay pastors and religious instructors and to maintain the parish. Other states used religious oaths to establish a state church. Early constitutions, such as those in New Jersey, Georgia, and South Carolina, required anyone seeking public office to profess a belief in Christianity and Protestantism. North Carolina and Pennsylvania required citizens to take strict oaths of belief before holding public office. And Delaware required all office holders to profess a belief in the Trinity and the divine inspiration of the Bible. The eloquence of those founders who saw the right of conscience as being critical to the success of this new nation was undoubtedly important in creating a constitution that did not bow to any but natural law. But it also began to be clear to all present at the convention that no one particular religious outlook could possibly hold sway, which helped to illustrate the problem even to those who argued strongly that a government should be built upon the foundations of the Christian faith. To read the documents of the founders is to see clearly that they understood what they were about in building a separation between church and state and thus providing all citizens the right of conscience. George Washington himself wrote, "If I could conceive that the general government might ever be so administered as to render the liberty of conscience insecure, I beg you will be persuaded that no one would be more zealous than myself to establish barriers against the horrors of spiritual tyranny and every species of religious persecution." Washington's religious beliefs are somewhat obscure, and when he did go to church, the denomination didn't seem to matter. He would be just as apt to attend the Catholic Church or the German Reformed Church or a Quaker meeting as he would be any Protestant congregation. His feeling about those he hired were just as expansive, writing to one of his trusted Army staff members that as long as the individual was a good workman, he welcomed Mohammedans, Jews, or Christians of any sect, or they may be atheists. The right of conscience was not secured easily, and as you can see by James Madison's memorandum, the states tended to drag their heels when it came to adjusting their own laws. As our own Peter Richardson writes in his book, The Boston Religion, the Unitarians were ostensibly the established state-supported church in eastern Massachusetts in the early 1800s. And that was much to the chagrin of the Baptists, Methodists, and even the Universalists. And that continued until 1833, until the church was disestablished. Many Unitarian ministers argued against constitutional language that created a wall between church and state, suggesting that to take away the purifying, restraining influence of religion would set free the demons of selfishness, excessive greed, and injustice. This, while at the same time their livelihood depended on the tax revenue from all citizens, including those Baptists, Methodists, and Universalists. The wall has been challenged in many ways on many fronts since the Constitution was ratified. At the time of the Civil War, for example, some religious leaders suggested that the nation's woes stemmed from the fact that God had been left out of the Constitution. And over the past 5 decades, the assaults on the right of conscience has become even more critical. As Congregational Minister Barry Lynn, who served as Executive Director of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State writes in his book, Piety and Politics, that wall means no one can force your children to pray in public schools against your wishes. It means school children will learn modern biology, not Bible stories masquerading as science. It means religious groups must rely on moral suasion, not the raw power of church and state to convince people to adopt their views. It means religious organizations must pay their own way in this world, not rely on government-provided handouts coerced from the taxpayer. Reverend Lynn suggests the folks who push to break down the wall of separation would be happier in the world of the Puritans, who could hang anyone who dissented or send them scurrying out of town. If today's challenges were direct and honest, we could maybe assume that the buttresses of law and precedent would hold firm. But the attacks come in more insidious ways, and they are constant and well supported financially. In her book, The Good News Club, journalist Catherine Stewart details what happened when a program of that name showed up on the roster of after-school activities at her daughter's public school in Santa Barbara. Stewards soon discovered that what was billed as a non-denominational Bible study program for children of kindergarten age and older requiring parental consent was really a carefully scripted effort to convert children to fundamentalist Christianity, sponsored by a national organization called the Child Evangelism Fellowship. The fact that such a program would be welcomed into public schools might surprise you. It certainly did me. But since the 1980s, court decisions have been made that tie the freedom of religion with the accompanying First Amendment right to free speech, diluting, I believe, the right of conscience. In Stewart's words, these decisions have essentially destroyed the post-war consensus on the separation of state in the school system. Here in Collier County, we have to look no further than our own school board to see that the battle is raging and the outcome is still in the balance. Funds are being diverted to charter schools whose religious leanings are thinly disguised. And the state voucher program has diverted $300 million to parents, 80% of which are sending their children to sectarian schools. With the parents as intermediaries in this transaction, the laws against the state's support of religious institutions are circumvented, but the reality is plain. On a national scale, you can point to the Hobby Lobby decision, where for the first time the Supreme Court recognized a for-profit corporation's claim of religious belief, allowing them to opt out of certain health care coverage for their employees that didn't align with that closely held organization's religious ideals. The dissenting opinion authored by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg suggested that the court had ventured into a minefield. And in many minds, the decision opened the door to possible discrimination of employees and customers. Not only that, but this suit and decision are part of a broad-based attack on the right to reproductive health care that is taking place all across the country, where the particular religious views of some are infringing on the rights of others to have full and affordable access to much-needed services. The political climate in this election year is acrid, to say the least. Where is the reasoned voice that promises to uphold the sanctity of church and state separation, as John Kennedy did in 1960? Where is the call for inclusiveness that sees the power of diversity as a way forward to create the America that never was? Now, with the fate of the court in the balance, so is the unfettered freedom of conscience that we enjoy. The political jockeying and rhetoric serves only to underscore the importance of this issue to both sides. As Unitarian Universalists, it is important for us to understand these issues as best we can, and to use our voices and our actions to speak truth to power and to make a difference in the world. And yet I know from personal experience how hard it is to find the time and the energy to do all I feel is needed. Part of this sense of deflation, especially about this issue, is that I thought the wall of separation was strong, that it would stand up to any pressure. Now I come to discover that any wall is only as strong as the people and the institutions that support it. In his detached memoranda, James Madison spent some time reflecting on some of the actions he had taken as president that were inconsistent with his strong support of the separation of church and state. He was aware of the need to be vigilant to any usurpations of that status, writing that the people of the United States owe their independence and their liberty to the wisdom of decrying the minute tax of 3 pence on tea, the magnitude of evil comprised in the precedent. They understood the precedent that they were facing. Let them exert the same wisdom in watching against every evil lurking under plausible disguises and growing up from small beginnings in the issue of church and state. During yesterday's discussion here in the sanctuary after the service, we talked about how easy it is to get discouraged, but that there are ways to act and make a difference in simple ways, with our vote, with letters to the editor, with our presence at open meetings, with learning how to talk with folks with whom we disagree. Two of Unitarian Universalism's core values, the affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the right of conscience, have led UUs repeatedly to endorse the separation of church and state and full reproductive choice. The General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association has adopted resolutions affirming church-state separation 6 times since 1961. Those resolutions call for each of us to uphold the principle of non-sectarian public education in any way we can, to uphold the principle of judicial review and oppose all efforts to deny the federal court's jurisdiction over school prayer, abortion rights, or other church-state disputes, to uphold the principle enunciated in the United States Supreme Court that all levels of government must remain respectfully neutral with regard to all religion, and finally, to uphold the constitutional privacy right of every woman acknowledged by the Supreme Court in 1973 in the Roe v. Wade decision. No one has ever said that being a Unitarian Universalist was easy. Our own religious freedom depends on our vigilance and our action. And it is by remembering our successes in the past on civil rights, on reproductive health issues, on LGBTQ rights and marriage equality that we know that the struggle can be worth the effort and that there can be joy in the journey towards making this America an America that will be. May it be so. Amen. Let us end our time together by remembering all those who have gone before us, all those whose living in this world has prepared the soil for our living, all those whose being has enabled our being. Let us also remember those whose existence is seeded in our lives today, not only those who are our physical descendants, but also those whose spirits inherit the love we sow, the hope we reap, the promise we harvest. And may we, who have inherited the freedom of conscience, never rest until all those who wish to be its children are sheltered. Let's rise and join together in singing our closing hymn, number 145, As Tranquil Streams.
As tranquil streams that meet and
Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Have a wonderful day. We'll meet back here in 15 minutes.